The United States is in a deadly debt spiral, and your family could be paying more than $300,000 for it. Check this out.
This is a national debt clock. It's been in New York since the late 80s, and it shows the gross national debt that we as a nation owe countries, companies, and people that lent us money, almost exclusively in the form of bonds. Back in 1989, it was just shy of $3 trillion. Today, it's north of $30 trillion. And if you look at it by household, there's a reality check, more than $300,000 owed per household. Many worry that a confluence of factors is going to send the U.S. into a debt spiral.
Let's be real for a second here, guys. The United States is routinely spending more than the country and the government is taking in. So despite what they always advise regular working class Americans, we as a country, led by this government, are living beyond our means. By the time we reach the end of 2030, it looks like the United States will be shelling out more money each year to cover the interest on its international debt than it will for its national defense. And just so that we're clear, this isn't because we're cutting down on military spending. It's because the cost of servicing that debt has skyrocketed. Right now, the U.S. Treasury Department is forking out a whopping $1.8 billion to handle the interest on our existing debt. And by 2033, that number is expected to climb to nearly $4 billion. It's a bit frustrating to think about how the money that we're shelling out each and every single day to support our deficit can't be used for things like improving our roads, bridges, infrastructure, securing a better future for our children, or even making Social Security, SSI, and SSDI recipients and benefits whole. Instead, it's going toward financing their debt, their deficit. It's basically like the country is shoveling money into an insatiable debt pit for all Americans. You know what I mean? Not to mention how we, as a country, we were able to accumulate $33 trillion and still fail to have free healthcare, free college, and no wage increases. Am I right, guys? So yeah, it's a U.S. interest payment crisis, and we need to talk about it right now because sooner or later, they're going to be talking about spending cuts, and that usually leads to how higher retirement ages or reduced Social Security payments would be in order. We definitely don't want that. So yeah, here we go, guys. Years of unchecked spending has culminated into a massive $33 trillion of national debt. And so that means we're dedicating a whopping $1 trillion every single year just to handle the debt. But how bad is this situation really? Is it the looming financial catastrophe that experts have been warning us about? In September, our national debt hit a staggering $33 trillion, and it shot up by another $1 trillion in just a few months. This isn't a one-time event. Our debt has been piling up for various reasons, including expenses related to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the crippling 2008 recession, and the recent economic aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Financial experts have been raising alarms for a while now. According to former White House economic advisor Steve Moore, the interest payments on our more than $33 trillion in national debt will soon surpass everything else in the budget. It will outstrip spending on the military, social services like Social Security, Medicare, and even education. It's a serious cause for concern for the American people. Now, speaking of serious concerns, I seriously recommend hitting the subscribe button and tapping that notification bell. That way you don't worry about missing any important updates like this one. And hey, while you guys are down there, I wouldn't mind you lighting up the like button for the channel. Definitely helps us get through those tricky YouTube algorithms and to get our information to more people. The more people who know about this, the bigger our financial freedom fam gets. So yeah, let's keep those likes and subscribes coming. Appreciate you guys. I mean, we really have to stick together, you guys. Just look at how the government can frivolously spend, mismanage money, and be continuously given more while average citizens are held fully accountable, penalized, harassed, denied, and even punished for our personal debts. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I hope we could work together to build something better, at least right here on our channel. You guys with me? Great. So let's talk more about America's interest payment crisis right here. Is Moore's prediction accurate? I mean, right now, we still spend more on national defense, but interest payments will likely overcome that amount within just a couple of years. So we're really not that far off from this nightmare scenario that's building up. America has paid a whopping $659 billion this year just on interest, nearly double the $352 billion paid in 2021. So how did we end up in this situation? Well, it's a mix of financial imbalances and rate hikes by the Federal Reserve. Taking a closer look, the Wharton's budget model team uncovered this. There's the public outstanding debt that we often hear about reaching a sizable $33.2 trillion. Then, of course, the debt held by the public, which is at $26.3 trillion, which is roughly 98% of our expected gross domestic product. So what does this leave us and our economy? 2%. Setting aside the ongoing debates about the debt ceiling and the potential government shutdowns, the ideal percentage for Wharton team for the debt held by the public shouldn't go beyond 200% of our GDP. And they're counting down the clock. They've given the United States a 20-year window to take corrective action before it pretty much is inevitable that we default on our debt. But it's not just about crunching numbers. It's also about missed opportunities. The Committee of Responsible Federal Budget points out that we now spend more on debt interest than we do on crucial programs like children, education, and military spending. Recently, a Republican presidential hopeful, Vivek Ramaswamy, he mentioned that the United States could have a surplus if the government had invested the way our financial advisors recommend. So, yeah, it may well be a missed opportunity by the federal government. The Manhattan Institute, a think tank for policy research, has a grim prediction about all of it. They say that if this trend continues, nearly 30% of all federal tax revenue will be burned for the sake of debt interest payments by the end of the decade. Yep, that's our tax dollars just going straight to interest. And even worse, this situation would push the United States to borrow even more, making this crisis even bigger. The Wharton team also added more advanced analysis of debt and its relationship with financial markets. With the government debt soaring, they say it's almost certain that the financial markets will start demanding higher interest rates. If they foresee out-of-control debt growth, they may push for even higher returns, creating a vicious cycle of rising borrowing costs and accelerating debt growth. The unchecked national debt could very well turn into a major economic roadblock. I mean, if it hasn't already. So the U.S. national debt and the associated interest payment troubles aren't just numbers on a balance sheet. They represent actual potential economic challenges on the horizon. As of the end of last year, each American taxpayer theoretically owes around $98,460. That's big, you guys. And you know that they're going to come a-knocking. So how did the U.S. get there? I can remember back in high school when our history teacher complained to us that our national debt was getting out of control, and that was at like $2 trillion. For a good 2 decades after the clock started ticking, our national debt was in a manageable state. But then everything changed in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. 2 significant events to talk about here. Our economy shrank and we started borrowing more money. With our economy taking a nosedive, the government resorted to huge deficit spending to try and get it back on track. That's when our current financial path really grabbed hold of the country. By 2013, even though our growth had improved somewhat, our mounting debt pushed us past the 100% mark for the first time in history, meaning our debt exceeded the size of our economy. Economists often use this comparison known as the debt to GDP ratio to check our country's financial health. It remained relatively stable for about a decade until everything changed yet again. Enter COVID-19 and our borrowing shot through the roof as the government sent relief checks, stimulus checks, and all sorts of financial assistance to business and consumers. The Federal Reserve did its part by lowering interest rates to near zero, which was initially helpful but ultimately led to a surge in inflation, and you pretty much know what happened after that. The Fed had to change course and raise interest rates to kingdom come. Record high credit card bills and mortgage rates unlike anything we've seen in recent history. Delinquency rates on credit cards, mortgages, and auto payments have all been ticking up as the level of household savings has been declining. 60-day car payment delinquencies for people with bad credit hit an all-time record high, 6.1% in September, up from 5.8% in August, according to the data from Fitch Ratings. That is the highest level of lateness since the company first started tallying rates in 1994. 90-day delinquencies on credit cards has increased to 5.1%, up from 3.4% in the second quarter of last year. And when it comes to balancing the budget, Washington is pretty much satisfied with a never-ending political gridlock. Year after year, tough decisions to balance the budget get postponed, thanks to the 11th hour compromises. Now sure, these last-minute deals save the day, but if you look at it closely, they really only kick the can down the road, especially since the underlying problem remains unresolved. The U.S. credit rating agencies are fully aware of this. You saw how Fitch recently downgraded our credit rating by 1 notch, stripping away a A+ status. This historic decision was mainly due to congressional disputes over our deficit as well as concerns about political instability from Washington. Fitch predicts that by 2025, our debt to GDP ratio will hit 118%, which is 3 times the average of similar countries. In other words, they're warning Washington that they need to get their act together. Now, there are viable real-life solutions for the US to achieve a healthier debt balance. Now, unfortunately, none of them are a walk in the park. One option is for the economy to experience stronger growth, but given our current rate of growth, that's not likely. Another approach is for Washington to agree on spending cuts. And these spending cuts would mean reducing spending in areas like healthcare, Medicare, and military funding. The third option is to raise taxes, something that politicians really avoid, especially in election years. Rapid growth, spending cuts, and increased taxes, they're all part of the Clinton administration's balanced budget plan, which was supposed to pay off the national debt by 2012. But the role of the government during the financial crisis and the pandemic definitely derailed things and altered the economic landscape for everybody. We saw how both Democrats and Republicans dipped into the public purse to prevent disaster and stimulate growth, but neither has really made a real effort to reduce the deficit. In conclusion, it's easy for Republicans and Democrats to point the finger at one another for the challenges that we're facing in our financial trajectory. But let's be real here. Both parties have made decisions that have contributed to this enormous deficit that we face today. And while the current debt situation is indeed alarming, what's even scarier is how politicians in Washington are using it as a political weapon. We need more moderates willing to reach across the aisle, but unfortunately, parties seem to be drifting further and further apart on the political spectrum. That much more difficult to find solutions for our poor fiscal management.